Before I begin, I do want to note, we have a lot of people in this room. I know a lot of people are elsewhere in the building. I appreciate, and I think on behalf of, frankly, all the commission and the staff, we very much appreciate the interest, the compassion that has been shown about this matter. That we have had thousands of comments, thousands of letters, many, many hearings over the last, not just this year, but in the last couple of years since we started looking at both the state energy plan and large-scale renewables. And I think we're all better and richer as a result. Today we're going to be going through the order. The commission will have an opportunity to ask questions, and then I'm going to ask each of the commissioners for their comments in turn. I would ask, and I understand that this is a matter of critical interest to the state. There's a lot of interest on a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And I would ask that all of you maintain your decorum and allow us to do our business, and then we will allow everyone can then do what they want to do afterwards. So with that, let me just start off with really a few opening comments. And then I'm going to turn it over to Paul to go through the proposed decision before us today. And this is regards to the Clean Energy Standard. So, and unlike mutually, I'm actually going to read. So there's no question that the topics before us today, and there are several, are of critical importance to New York. These are questions that really, regardless of how we answer them, is going to have a permanent impact on the energy landscape in the state. But like many complex challenges, they are best answered by breaking them down into simple questions and real solutions. For the Commission, our North Star question always is, what is in the best interest of the electric consumers in New York when it comes to the planning, the development, and the operation of the retail electric system and the companies we oversee? And today we're going to be answering that question within the context of a basic determination that based on the real experience that New York has had with major climatic events, it has become apparent that integral to the consumer interest in an industry that is so affected with the broad public interest is to make sure that in order for the New York electric system to be reliable, to be efficient, to be resilient, and to be cost-effective, the electric industry we are rebuilding must also be designed, built, and operate to effectuate carbon reduction and combat climate change. So the questions really become really simple and straightforward. Do we adopt the standard by 50 by 30? And if so, how do we implement it? And second, if our goals are the twins of ensuring fuel diversity and carbon reduction, can we get there feasibly and practically if our nuclear plants that today provide a diverse source of power and 30% of zero carbon energy, as well as other critical local benefits, abruptly retire from the system? Now, it really may seem odd for an economic regulator to be so worried about carbon, but that would really be wrong. During the Paris climate talks, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon reminded us that saving our planet, lifting people out of poverty, and advancing economic growth are really one and the same fight. When done in the right way, the solutions for one of these issues can be solutions for all. As economists have reminded us, the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment and not vice versa. By not effectively pricing in the cost of the environment to our electric choices, we are, in fact, causing economic inefficiencies. Under Governor Cuomo's leadership, REV as a whole and the CES before us embodies this sentiment. The proposed CES is an example of government recognizing that proposed actions to prevent climate change is now both a moral imperative, no longer a choice, but a necessity, and an economic one. The order details the billions of dollars lost to the economy and electric consumers from climate change and an electric grid that does not sufficiently value the importance of a diverse and clean energy portfolio of resources. More particularly, this commission has on many occasions recognized that for the 21st century power system, the environmental action is more often than not the basic economic choice. Over the last decade, the cost of renewables have fallen dramatically, and with the scale provided by the CES and the actions we are considering today, they can continue to do so. We're now at a time and a place where, when done in accordance with sound physics and business operations, choosing technologies that reduce energy usage and portfolios of resources that combine renewable technologies like solar with storage technologies that shift and allow us to control our use of power represent a true efficient and economic choice, as well as the environmental one. The very essence of REV is that we can now apply science, math, and smart regulation to change the way power is produced, delivered, and consumed to ensure that our environmental solutions and economic benefits are simultaneously achieved. We only need to look at the actions that our utilities have already taken to incorporate renewable resources as an alternative to traditional investment to see the multiple economic benefits to be achieved through integrating environmental sensibility into day-to-day utility operations. And despite the suggestions of some in this docket, all of our decisions represent our broad and deep understanding of the energy system and the technological and system realities we must address. Today's New York's energy mix is a little over 45% fossil-based, with the remaining elements being made up of nuclear, hydro, and renewable resources. We actually have only about 4% coal in our energy resource base, and we're on the road of eliminating all coal into our mix. Baseload nuclear alone represents just over 30% of the energy produced. The owners of our New York nuclear plants have informed us and shown that because of the abundant supply of natural gas in the market, the price of natural gas and natural gas generation have dropped so low that we are at risk of losing the zero carbon attributes that these plants provide. If these plants close abruptly, they will in all likelihood be replaced by the attributes of expanded fossil fuel-based generation, and this will, of course, impair our ability to achieve our environmental goals. The CES therefore proposes a bridge to pay the nuclear units for their zero carbon attributes so that we can secure our renewable mandate and our carbon reduction goals in a cost-effective and realistic manner. The CES that we're going to be discussing today and voting on today is really, in my mind, an essential and symbiotic complement of all the actions that this Commission has already taken under REV. It incorporates our statutory responsibility to ensure that long-term planning actions are taken by energy providers in New York to secure a reliable, efficient, safe, and environmentally sound power system. It respects the fact that we live in a world of cooperative federalism with shared jurisdiction with the FERC over the wholesale energy sector. It enhances our objectives to use consumer choice and the ingenuity of markets as valuable assets that will allow us to achieve and exceed our goals. And it is pragmatic in recognizing that the best way to achieve our environmental goals is to have a measured plan that is clear, that is ambitious, that is economically sound, and that is technology and technically achievable. So with that, I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. I'll turn it over to Paul to review the order.
Thank you. And good morning. I'm going to give a brief overview of the session item, and then we can get to your questions. This session item proposes the adoption of the Clean Energy Standard, a long-range program to ensure that the load-serving entities that secure the electricity that serves customers in New York do so in a manner that conserves natural resources and preserves environmental values. Who are the load-serving entities? They are the companies that buy power in bulk for resale to us at the consumer level. They include the traditional electric distribution companies, the competitive energy service companies that we call ESCOs, LIPA, the Long Island Power Authority, NYPA, the New York Power Authority, various municipal utilities, electric cooperatives, and a class of entities known as direct customers. It is desirable that all of these load-serving entities do their fair share to achieve the clean energy standard. They will all share in the clean energy benefits, so it is proposed that they should all share in the obligation to make it happen. To the degree that the Commission does not have full jurisdiction over these entities, it is proposed that they participate with the rest of their own accord. Our understanding is that LIPA and NYPA have already indicated a willingness to cooperate and participate. One of the motivations for the Clean Energy Standard is the goal of the State Energy Plan that 50% of New York's electricity is to be generated by renewable sources by 2030. That goal is part of a strategy to reduce statewide greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030. This session item proposes that the Commission adopt that goal and make it a mandate to be achieved by the load-serving entities as the foundational basis and essential component of the Clean Energy Standard. So what is the Clean Energy Standard? The Clean Energy Standard consists of two major components, the Renewable Energy Standard and the Zero Emissions Credit Requirement. And those two components are broken down further into three tiers of obligations. So Tier 1, which is under the Renewable Energy Standard, is a proposed obligation on all load-serving entities to invest in new renewable generation resources to serve their retail customers, evidenced by the procurement of qualifying renewable energy credits, or RECs. They would be acquired in quantities that satisfy mandatory minimum percentages that will grow each year. The rate of growth proposed would be more than twice the annual rate under the former Renewable Portfolio Standard, or RPS, program. Resources eligible to provide Tier 1 compliance will mirror the eligibility rules currently used for the main tier of the RPS, with the exception that the former 30-megawatt limit on low-impact run-of-river hydroelectric facilities is proposed to be eliminated. The eligible resource categories include biogas, biomass, liquid biofuels, fuel cells, hydroelectric, solar, tidal, ocean, and wind. New hydro impoundments remain ineligible. Load-serving entities may satisfy their obligation by either purchasing RECs acquired through central procurement by NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or by self-supply by direct purchase of tradable RECs, or, in the alternative, they may make alternative compliance payments to NYSERDA in order to comply. Each load-serving entity would demonstrate compliance through an annual compliance filing. After careful consideration, it is not proposed that load-serving entities, as a matter of first preference, be required at this time to enter into power purchase agreements to meet their obligations. Mandating utilities to enter long-term power purchase agreements would present a significant financial risk to ratepayers and to utilities because there's no assurance of a long-term customer base from which to recover the cost of power contracts. The potential of having to resort to a delivery surcharge to recover costs limits competitive choice. Similarly, it is not proposed that fully regulated electric distribution companies be permitted at this time to build utility-owned generation facilities to meet their obligation. Utility-owned generation can cost less than the alternatives in the near term, largely because utilities have lower finance costs, but utility-owned generation also has the potential to inhibit entry by other market participants, which can result in less competition and higher costs in the long run. In addition, until there is more clarity from the courts, these approaches could also lead to the potential for federal preemption, creating a risk that would unacceptably slow the implementation of the Renewable Energy Standard. And I'll talk more about federal preemption in a minute. So let's go to Tier 2. Tier 2 is also under the Renewable Energy Standard. It's a proposed obligation on all customers to continue to provide support to maintain certain existing renewable resources, mostly small hydroelectric facilities less than 5 megawatts in size, in the same manner as the prior RPS program maintenance tier. The Tier 2 methodology results in potential contracts to support certain costs deemed eligible by the Commission on a case-by-case basis. It is generally considered more cost-effective to preserve the existing renewable energy attributes of these facilities than to replace their contribution with new facilities. And then finally, Tier 3, the zero emissions credit requirement, is modeled after features of both Tier 1 and Tier 2. It is a proposed obligation on all load-serving entities to preserve the zero emissions environmental attributes of certain zero-carbon electric generating facilities for which the Commission has found that such preservation is a public necessity. It is proposed in the session item that the Commission find that there is a current public necessity to preserve the zero-emission attributes of the Fitzpatrick, Ginna, and 9 Mile Point nuclear generation facilities. New York's upstate nuclear plants avoid the emission of over 15 million tons of carbon dioxide per year, along with other air pollutant emissions. It is proposed that every load-serving entity in New York State be obligated to purchase by contract with NYSERDA an amount of zero-emission credits representing that load-serving entity's proportional share of ZECs purchased annually by NYSERDA pursuant to the zero-emissions credit requirement. So in other words, everybody would just do their proportional share to keep those resources. The load-serving entity's proportional share is determined based on the proportion of electric energy load served by the load-serving entities in relation to the total electric energy load served by all load-serving entities in the New York control area. The load-serving entity NYSERDA contractual relationship will require load-serving entities to periodically purchase ZECs during a program year based on initial forecasts of load and a balancing reconciliation at the end of each program year. The compliance period shall be for 6 two-year tranches, a total of 12 years, commencing April 1, 2017, and will continue until March 31, 2029. Each load-serving entity will demonstrate compliance through an annual compliance filing. Now, both the Tier 1 RECs and the Tier 3 ZECs are based on similar principles in relation to federal law. Both are attributes purchase programs of the kind that FERC, that's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, both are of the kind that FERC was describing when it ruled that REC programs for purchasing attributes are for a commodity created by states that is not within the wholesale sale of electricity jurisdiction of FERC. Federal law preempts contrary state law pursuant to the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Under the Federal Power Act, FERC has exclusive authority to regulate the sale of electric energy at wholesale in interstate commerce. The Federal Power Act calls it the sale of electricity for resale. That's what they mean by wholesale. States, however, retain the power to regulate the retail sale of electricity and use customers. All commission actions must take place within the cooperative federalism structure of energy regulation and the myriad state and federal court cases describing the jurisdictional boundaries. The Clean Energy Standard has been purposefully designed to be within the retail sales authority of the Commission. States may not seek to achieve ends, however legitimate, through regulatory means that intrude on FERC's authority over interstate wholesale rates. But states may encourage production of new or clean generation through measures untethered to a generator's wholesale market participation. Now, there's one primary difference between the REC's methodology and the ZEC's methodology that should be discussed a little further. Tier 1 RECs have the benefit of many developers that are willing to compete to be awarded RECs contracts. That level of competition is sufficient to establish the value of RECs in an open procurement solicitation. Unfortunately, for Tier 3 ZECs, there are only 2 potential bidders among the qualified facilities. That is too few to fashion any kind of competitive process to establish the value of ZECs. Instead, the only real alternative is to establish the value of RECs administratively. The session item takes the approach of valuing and paying for zero-emission attributes, or ZECs, based on a formula that starts with the best available published estimates of the social cost of carbon. These estimates were developed for the United States Environmental Protection Agency in coordination with other federal agencies, and they were prepared by a group called the U.S. Interagency Working Group. That value is then adjusted downward to subtract a fixed baseline portion of that cost already captured in the market revenues received by the eligible facilities due to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI program. In other words, if you take the social cost of carbon, the RGGI program results in activities that internalize part of that cost into the cost of electricity. So some of it has already been internalized. So the remainder is what we're using to set the price or set the value for ZECs. In later years in the program, a number of adjustments are built into the formula to adjust for changes in value over time. This approach, in which ZEC payments for zero emissions attributes are based upon the social cost of carbon less RGGI effects, is fully consistent with the Commission's approach in setting guidelines for benefit cost analysis adopted in the REV program. So this is not the first time this has been used. I'm not going to take the time now to recount the extensive procedural steps, including white papers, technical conferences, environmental impact statements, public statement hearings, public notices, and the thousands of comments that were received and analyzed before these recommendations were made for you. They are described extensively in the session item. I will note, however, the over-the-top effort of many, many people on staff to get this item before you in a timely manner, so as to give you two important opportunities. The first opportunity is that there currently are very favorable federal incentives available for the development of new renewable resources. If you act today to address the Tier 1 issues, it is very likely that your action will affect both the 2016 and 2017 procurements in a favorable way that will ultimately result in less cost to consumers. The second opportunity of acting today is that your actions will be just in time to not foreclose your options as to how to address the risk of losing the zero emissions attributes of the nuclear facilities. Unlike other generation facilities, our understanding is that when nuclear generators cease operations, cessation is generally permanent. The plant owners are facing imminent business decisions with important consequences, and your action today may make all the difference. So this concludes my presentation. There are many other details in the session item that I'm not going to present, but we have an extensive team of experienced staff here that stands ready to address any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And so what we're going to do now is really we're going to turn it to questions. But before I do want to echo Paul's last statement, and I think we can say it once and say it 1,000 times. This has been an incredible endeavor, not only of all the parties to this proceeding, but frankly this staff. And I think that the commissioners will agree that the order before us is not only extremely thoughtful and responsive and certainly well thought out and well articulated, but reflects the professionalism of our staff and frankly the compassion and passion that they bring to work every day for what they do. And I want to thank them now and thank them again, because it was an incredible piece of work. And if we don't do it, we're going to have to wish Paul happy birthday, because we made him to work till midnight on his birthday. So, but with that, let me turn it over to questions. And who would like to? Any question? Want to begin, Greg?
I'd like to echo the chair's comment that I am extremely impressed by the hard work, the detailed analysis, the professionalism, and the good writing of staff that went into this item. But I would like to ask staff, have you examined other options for retaining the nuclear units, such as increasing the RGGI price rather than using ZECs?
Good morning, Commissioner. Let me take a shot at answering that question. In short, yes, we did look at other mechanisms to provide this financial support that would be needed. RGGI would be one of them. However, we all know that RGGI is a multi-state compact and program. Making any changes is not unilateral, and New York State alone cannot change the whole RGGI regime. It'll take some time before changes are made in RGGI. And I should also note, notwithstanding the existence of RGGI, many other states use other means to supplement the revenue resources for clean energy resources, such as the RPS standards that are in place. That said, another factor we should think about is, should RGGI be the vehicle to provide the additional financial support? What that means is you would have to increase the RGGI price significantly enough to meet the financial needs of these ailing nuclear plants. And what does that mean? So increasing RGGI prices significantly would translate to increasing the energy locational marginal prices. And those increased prices would be paid to all the output, and hence that would also lead to increased consumer costs. So increasing RGGI is not without cost. It could lead to a much more significant consumer cost than what is being presented here. The second alternative would be if there are changes to the wholesale market price mechanisms that could provide the financial support. At this time, there are no specific concrete proposals to make changes to the wholesale market. We would like to work with all the participants there to see if changes can be made over time. And the proposal in front of you suggests down the road, should there be other mechanisms that get developed, then we should take a relook at this particular mechanism that we are proposing to adopt today. So we've looked at other mechanisms. What we are proposing to you right now is the solution that we can offer to meet the needs.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Pat, are you?
Yeah, I have a question. What specific changes to the staff responsive proposal are being made in this order, and why?
Let me take a shot at that, and others can jump in as needed.
Notice anyone's jumping up and saying, let me have it, let me have it.
So the staff responsive proposal, as Paul described, had a particular formulaic approach for determining the ZEC payment levels. And it contemplates updates in every 2 years in the tranches 1 through 6, starting with tranche 2. Some of the parties have suggested changes to the formula, and let me just describe a couple of suggestions that were made that we found pretty compelling, and we are responding to that in this in the proposal in front of you. The first one, the way the formula is structured is, as Paul described, the ZEC payment contemplates paying based on the societal cost of carbon less the RGGI built-in baseline level. In order to come up with the social cost of carbon, there are mechanics in there that would translate the cost from $1 per ton to $1 per megawatt hour. And that requires a marginal emission rate assumption that goes into that conversion. And some of the parties have pointed out, instead of locking in that particular conversion factor for the 12 years, it should be updated, because the emission rate would go down as there are more renewables in the mix of the state resource mix. And I think that's a good argument, and the proposal in front of you adopts changes to the emission rate as a function of increased penetration of renewables in the resource mix. And this would inure to the benefit of consumers, as it would lower the ZEC price level down the road as more renewables are penetrating in the resource mix. The second suggestion that folks have made deals with a little bit more esoteric topic of what is called a basis differential. That is, today we have zonal locational marginal prices, and the formula, ZEC payment formula, contemplates changes to the forecast energy and capacity prices every 2 years to be reflected as a reduction in the ZEC payment level. That is, if those prices go up, market forecast prices, then the ZEC payment would go down accordingly from the initial tranche level. But what the generator essentially receives is not necessarily the zonal locational marginal price. It is a little bit different from its bus, and the difference is called the basis differential. And the way the formula works is if the basis differential goes down, the generator could get more revenues. So some of the parties have suggested that this basis differential should not be held constant, but should be updated over time as the topology and the congestion patterns in the region change. We believe that's a legitimate concern that should be addressed. And so what we're proposing in this update is that in future tranches, we will the formula would consider the latest known the basis levels, and accordingly would adjust the formula to reflect the change in basis beyond a certain deadband. And to the extent the basis differential goes down from the current levels, then the ZEC payment levels would go down as well. But if the differential goes up, consumers would not pay more than the social cost of carbon as prescribed in the formula. So those are the two major formulaic changes that we made in response to comments from parties. The other two, at a very high level, the staff responsive proposal suggested that there should be some performance plan for these generators. We all should note that the way the formula is structured, the payment is structured, it's on a per unit output basis, per megawatt hour of output. So naturally, the generators should have the incentive to maximize performance and maximize output, because they would get two revenue streams with increased output. One, from the market, the energy revenues, and two, from the ZEC payments, increased revenues up to a cap. However, notwithstanding that, we would like the generators to continue to have an incentive to perform at the highest levels possible. They have been operating over 95% capacity factors. These are really working horses, and we want them to have that incentive to be at a high level. So the meat that we put on the performance mechanism is, should the performance slip below a certain level, if the performance slips below a certain level in a given tranche, then in the next tranche, the quantity purchased by NYSERDA from the units would be reduced, which means they would get fewer ZEC revenues. So this is an additional mechanism or a tool to ensure the generators have the motivation to perform at the highest levels. And finally, the last proposed change is on what we would call facility closure contingency. And what this means is the ZEC price that's being paid is a uniform price for all the 4 units that have that we believe would be qualified. And some of the parties have suggested what changes would or should be made should one of the 4 units not be available during this period. And clearly, there are concerns that 1 or 2 may be shut down if the proper incentives are not in place. So this mechanism provides that formulaic incentive to have all of the units available. Should one of the units not be available for whatever reason down the road, then this formula adjusts again to reduce the quantity of ZECs that would be purchased by NYSERDA from the owners. This would provide an additional incentive for the owners to maintain and keep all the 4 units operational through this contract period. So those are the 4 major changes that we are proposing to make from the staff responsive proposal. There are other minor changes, but these are the 4 major changes.
Thank you.
Any follow-up for Raj? Any further questions? Pat, did you?
I remember in the proposal here that the New York Geothermal had sent comments, and so I'm wondering what we will be doing for them. As you know, Geo is close to my heart, and I want to make sure that they're included in all of this as a renewable.
Tina, can you take that?
Sure, absolutely. And Commissioner, it doesn't surprise me that you asked this question because I do recall ever since you came to the Commission, geothermal has been near and dear to your heart. So yes, you are correct. The geothermal industry proposes that a thermal renewable energy credit, known as a TREC, be applicable to geothermal heat pumps to recognize the fact that they utilize renewable geothermal energy and have the ability to reduce system-wide carbon emissions. Staff also recognizes that including geothermal heat pumps as an eligible technology could add to the additional sources of competitive RECs to the overall compliance pool, which could reduce costs for participants. The comments from the New York geothermal industry also acknowledge that their proposal does have a lot of administrative complexities involved in determining the mechanisms by which geothermal can be converted into TRECs. So during the implementation phase that is discussed in the draft order, staff proposes that we put together a process for parties to consider on how to address these complexities and to explore some of the other administrative mechanisms that might be employed to accommodate geothermal heat pumps as an eligible technology.
Will you look at what states are doing, Tina?
Yes, as a matter of fact, several of us sat in on a webinar where we heard staff from New Hampshire explain their program. They are one of the first states to provide for this TREC concept. So staff, along with NYSERDA, will continue to engage with them to see how they address some of these complexities, especially measurement, verification, evaluation, so we can learn from their experiences.
Great, thank you.
If I can just add, and I think this is a sort of a more of a universal recognition that's embraced in the order. We're really embarking now on the first phase of what we see as a multi-phase implementation. The orders we're deciding today will allow us to move forward with both the REC program and the ZEC program, but it contemplates, and I think staff adroitly talked about as an implementation phase as opposed to an implementation order, because there will be multiple elements of implementing this, the Clean Energy Standard, as well as supporting the triennial reviews and the annual reviews. So one of the expectations that I have is that we will continue to work this issue. We're going to always look for ways to improve how we're achieving the standard and making sure that the technologies that we know will help us in the state to get where we're going to go have their appropriate place. And so clearly, the geothermal industry brought up the concept of a TREC. I think there are probably other solutions as well, but it is just like everything else, until we actually focus on something and then look at it as a potential solution, that's how we bring it back to the Commission, and that's really the process we're going to be following here. So, any further questions, Commissioner Berman?
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank staff, in particular the folks who've spent tireless hours with me, and including over the weekend, to go through in painstakingly detail. I know it was painful for me, and I'm sure being with me was painful for many of you. But I do recognize the hard work that has gone into this, and I very much appreciate it. I really have a couple of threshold questions, and some of this, Paul, you said in your comments, so I just want to make sure that it's clear and kind of ticking through the list. When we talk about the eligibility of Tier 1, can you reiterate what it is that is changing, continuing, where, specifically what's been modified, anything and everything that might deviate from the current process?
Would Paul or Scott or Tina? I think that's better for Tina.
Sure. I'll take this one.
Tina will go. And
okay. So, so Commissioner Berman, the eligibility list, for the most part, mimics what was eligible in the RPS program, and I believe Paul had stated this in his presentation, with the exception of the lifting of the 30 megawatt limit on run-of-river hydro facilities. What staff proposed in the white paper and what we have recommended to the Commission in the draft order is that that 30 megawatt limit be lifted. However, we still recommend that there will not be any new storage impoundments. So the old RPS program had the ability for resources to be eligible if they added incremental generation to already to facilities that already had impoundments. So if they wanted to add incremental generation, that was eligible. We're going to keep that eligibility. The lifting of the 30 megawatt on the run-of-river facilities, and by definition, run-of-river don't include brand new big storage impoundments. So we'll lift the 30 megawatt limit. So if a 50 megawatt run-of-river facility wanted to be developed, that would be eligible for Tier 1. So we're lifting the 30 megawatt, but still we are including the no new storage impoundments for existing facilities. And that was already in the RPS. So really just lifting the 30 megawatt run-of-river is what we're doing.
That means that the out-of-state, out-of-country hydro are included in meeting the goals?
So if a out-of-state, out-of-country hydro project was being developed, a brand new facility being developed, it would have to follow our eligibility rules. So let's say a 50 megawatt run-of-river new, that would be eligible out-of-state, out-of-country. If a Canadian hydro facility, if a developer wanted to add some incremental renewable generation to an existing impounded facility, saying adding a new turbine to increase the capacity of that facility, that would also be eligible as a Tier 1. The incremental portion would be eligible.
We also want to add the deliverability component because that's critical as well.
That's correct. There is the deliverability component that's also stated, and that had also been a eligibility requirement in the RPS order or in the RPS program.
And I'd just like to add that upgrades to existing hydro facilities are not uncommon. NYPA over the last decade has done a significant number of upgrades to their facilities and has increased hydro's share of our overall portfolio in the state by a significant amount without any new impoundments.
In the same for the RPS program, there have been several hydro facilities that have added incremental generation that have been included.
Okay, thank you, because I'm just looking for clarification, so I appreciate that. And then on the, I call it NGATS, I don't know if that's what everyone else does. Isn't that what I said? Right.
That was the European pronunciation.
On that, what has changed, been modified, replaced, deleted, all the above, or stayed the same?
On the GATS program, Tina, you're the most familiar. Why don't you start? And then
well, NIGATS is going to be is newly developed. NYSERDA, it's actually up and operating now. So we didn't have a NIGATS system in the old RPS program. So when you ask what's new and different about NIGATS, well, it's a new system that's actually going to track all generation So this will be used for compliance. The order discusses in one of the appendices what the tracking system will do. And so it will not only track all the RECs from renewable generation, but it will prevent double counting and will allow NYSERDA to use that platform to ensure that, and we use that platform to ensure compliance with the RPS program. So all the LSCs will be required to register on the GATS system, and as I said, all the RECs will be tracked in that system as well for compliance.
It also makes administration of the program much easier than it otherwise would be. You can just log on to the system. You can buy and sell RECs on the system, and you can demonstrate your compliance. If you didn't have that system, you would have to go out and figure out where buyers and sellers are and arrange transactions, and you'd have to find out whether things were eligible or not. And whereas this simplifies the whole matter, it's going to make everybody's life much easier. But
I would also note that having a generation of attribute tracking system is consistent with what we see with other states or nearby states who also use renewable energy credit auctions. So what New York is really doing is actually not only helping implement our own system, but really supporting a much more broader and, I think, economic regional market for renewables, which will be helpful to all of us.
Thank you. And then for NIGATS was in Appendix C. And then for Tier 2, the same question as to the eligibility and any changes to that.
There's no changes in eligibility to Tier 2 from the old RPS maintenance tier.
And any changes to process?
Not really, no.
No, not proposed, but the order does speak to the fact that if staff believes that there should be further considerations, we can put that out in one of the implementation phases for parties' consideration.
But then it would have to come back to the commission.
Right.
Okay. And then can you explain the NYSERDA role, especially as it pertains to holding the RECs?
Well, if you want to build new renewable generation...
Paul.
Go ahead. Okay.
If you want to build new renewable generation, generally a developer needs a long-term contract, a long-term commitment, because they're making a significant capital investment. So NYSERDA provides the opportunity to give developers a 20-year contract, which is an extremely favorable term that will keep the price of the RECs down. Many developers will be competing against each other to get those contracts. That's different than the LSEs, who all have, the load-serving entities, who all have differing load which they can't count on for 20 years. So by NYSERDA buying the RECs in a long-term contract, the developer gets what it needs to build the plant, and then NYSERDA then resells the RECs to the load-serving entities on a short-term basis so that they can meet their annual compliance targets without taking on the risk of long-term contracts. If you're a small load-serving entity and you lose a big customer and you had a long-term contract, your business might fail. So this tries to accommodate both sides of the marketplace.
Within that, do you want to also talk about the role of the ACE, the alternative compliance mechanism? Because I think that's important. Maybe, Scott, do you want to?
Sure. So, as Paul mentioned in his remarks, there are a number of ways that an LSC can demonstrate compliance. And one is, again, a well-established market mechanism of the alternative compliance payment. So an LSC has the opportunity to elect to make this payment in lieu of acquiring RECs. As these programs have operated, LSCs will rationally look for the lowest cost method of compliance, and the alternative compliance payment costs are traditionally set above the anticipated REC price, so that LSCs will be incented to financially support renewals by the acquisition of the RECs. The process for determining the ACP and the establishment of the ACP will all be proposed during an implementation proposal that will be considered by the Commission. The first year's ACP is provided for in the order that's before you today.
And what happens with folks entering into a contract with NYSERDA in this process?
In what sense? What happens?
Explain to me how we now go from this market-based focus with NYSERDA and entering into contracts with, for example, energy service companies.
Okay, so the main purpose of the contract between the load-serving entity and NYSERDA is to establish a schedule so that for instance, NYSERDA is going to offer RECs for sale to the load-serving entities. There has to be a way for each load-serving entity to get an opportunity to get their fair share of whatever NYSERDA has procured. So they basically get a right of first refusal. And then there has to be a time period by which all load-serving entities make that decision. That would be in the contract. When the payments are due to NYSERDA would be in the contract. What kind of reconciliation process after during the settlement period would all be in the contract. It's not a long-term commitment. It more sets up the parameters of how the mechanics work on a day-to-day basis during the compliance year.
And who could trade the RECs and who can retire them?
Okay, so the proposal is, at least for now, that the NYSERDA procured RECs would only be given out to the load-serving entities for compliance and that they would not be tradable. But we're also allowing in the order for tradable RECs. So if someone creates a REC outside of the NYSERDA procurement process itself, that REC is fully tradable, so you can buy it, you can sell it, you can have too many, you can have too few, you can do whatever you want with those RECs. Eventually, during the implementation phase, we will consider whether it would be a good idea or not to make the NYSERDA RECs tradable too. But until we get the system working and we see how it's going to work, the main concern that we have is that we want to make sure that when NYSERDA procures RECs at an extremely good price, that ratepayers get the value of that, and we don't want that value lost in some trading process.
Is NYSERDA set up to do all this in short order?
Yes.
I think NYSERDA and staff, in terms of that, since the staff issued the white paper in January, and in looking both in terms of where we were headed with this program, have actually been working and thinking through the implementation steps with the view that they're going to be, certainly be ready to go for this year, and then over the next year we'll be, I'm sure, making a series of implementation type decisions. But I know that there's been two fairly significant staff teams that have been thinking through and sweating the details, and I believe they are ready.
Okay, thank you. And can you go over again under this order who is a load-serving entity for purposes of what we're doing today?
Everybody. Okay, so we have the 6 distribution companies. That's Con Ed, Niagara Mohawk, or National Grid, NYSEG, RG&E, O&R, Central Hudson. All of the ESCOs, LIPA and NYPA. There are a bunch of municipal utility companies in New York. There are a very small number of electric cooperatives in New York. And then there are some companies that are direct customers, and they are actually load-serving entities already on the New York ISO system. They buy their power generally for their own consumption. So it's any company that actually sells the power for consumption.
Okay.
Final consumption.
And
as opposed to the wholesale market, which is regulated by FERC, which is sales for resale. Okay. So if you're not going to sell it to the end user, then you're not a load-serving entity.
Paul, just to clarify, we have a jurisdictional LLCs where the commission can mandate this, and then we have other LLCs, LIPA and NYPA, who have stated they're going to, as you mentioned earlier, they're voluntarily going to participate. So I don't know if there's any distinction that needs to be drawn there. But
I don't think so. I mean, LIPA is a load-serving entity, and NYPA is acting in that capacity when we're talking about this. But I think fundamentally, to answer Commissioner Berman's question, in our system of how we work, there are the producers of power generators, and they often sell to wholesalers or retailers who then turn around and sell it to consumers. The one assumption is that there's some very large customers who function as their own buyer of wholesale energy and resell essentially to themselves, and they are considered load-serving entities because of they're both the ultimate consumer. But the end product here, and I think this is we can talk about it more, but is very important, is that these obligations will be applied statewide. And so every consumer in this state buys energy from a resource and or a load-serving entity of some type, and that load-serving entity will have in its resource mix the requirements that we're imposing here, or in the case of LIPA and NYPA, are voluntarily submitting to have those same requirements met.
What will be the process, not only for the jurisdictional entities, but the non-jurisdictional entities, in terms of sharing with them what this means, what the next steps are, how this applies or does not apply, and especially with the non-jurisdictional ones, what the process may be, because they are voluntarily potentially participating, which may have many different meanings. So I'm just trying to get a sense of exactly what we're doing from an educational outreach perspective.
Okay, so the initial step is, in addition to the normal service of this order on whoever the parties are, is the staff is in the process of compiling a list of all the load-serving entities, and will be sending a hard copy of the order along with a letter explaining the program and offering to have them come in and talk to us so that they can understand what the requirements are. So every load-serving entity will be directly notified by mail by staff as part of the service process of the order. And then I don't know what other activities you may have planned, Scott.
Well, consistent with that, and as part of the briefings that Paul mentioned, staff and NYSERDA will be providing regular communications to LSCs on compliance methods and obligations, and this will be in the form of writings, in the form of briefings and the like, with the first actions to come through, really assuming that this order is adopted today. The two staff teams will be meeting first thing tomorrow morning to begin that communication planning.
Okay. The other question I have is, we move this from the delivery charge to the supply charge, and I'm trying to fully understand what that means, pro and con.
Raj, do you want to start?
Yeah. So there are different ways of collecting costs, and in this proposal in front of you, the obligation is being placed on ESCOs and other LSCs, utilities and other LSCs. So the initial allocation of the cost, at least for the ZECs, is going to be on the prescribed number that you have in front of you on the ZEC payment, but it's going to be on a volumetric basis statewide. Similarly, for the REC costs too, NYSERDA may spread them around on a volumetric basis. Once the LSC receives an invoice as to what its obligation is based on its load ratio share, then they would have to collect those costs from their customers. And the tool that they have is the supply charges, because that's all they supply to the consumers. So this charge would not appear in the future as a delivery charge, but would be baked into the supply charge. As to how an ESCO charges its consumers, it's up to the ESCO and their pricing schemes.
Okay.
I think there's another aspect of this that I think is worthwhile bringing in at this point, which we talked about when we decided last year in the Clean Energy Fund to eliminate additional delivery surcharges. And that's really the fact that consumers are not monolithic. that there are a lot of consumers in New York who are very interested in actually doing even more than the state is asking in terms of the renewable component of their mix. And by putting these on the supply charges, consumers can use two different things and not have what would amount to a non-bypassable delivery charge. And we ran into problems with that when we were looking at the self-direct program with energy efficiency. If it's in the delivery surcharge, it's hard to give consumers their full credit. So one is that we are talking about energy, so it really does belong in the commodity portion of the bill. But secondly, it's very consistent with our REV approach towards looking at voluntary consumer action or self-initiating consumer action, that where consumers are doing this based on personal choice as opposed to a government requirement, and reflecting that in their total energy bill. And frankly, excuse me, we need to leave. You need to leave.
Standing here in New York State, where hot times never end, and our state's just a dumb state.
Guess she doesn't like renewable energy. Anyway, that's the intent of what we're trying to do today, which is just to really provide that choice. So I think by moving it on the commodity supply, it really provides that advantage for people to do a lot more and that flexibility.
Okay, great. I just have, I just need to think for a second. What happens if there are unintended consequences? What does the order provide in terms of a glide path to address some of the things that maybe we haven't thought about in terms of?
Scott, do you want to address?
Sure. There are two review processes, regular review processes, that are provided for by the draft order. There'll be an annual staff review. We call it a divergence review in the order, really to take a look to see if the glide path and the assumptions that underlie that particular year's activity are staying on track. And importantly, the order also provides for what we call triennial reviews. Every 3 years, the Commission will be taking a review of the results, looking at the procurement schedules, looking at the targets that have been set, and seeing whether any adjustments should be made. So both annually and triannually by the Commission, there will be reviews and a constant hand on the policy throttle, if you will.
Oh, thank you. And I just have one last question. I think this is a Jeff Hogan question. Have we looked at what this means for the financial health of the utilities, especially to the sub-issue of declining sales that might be expected?
Right. So we have looked at the financial health that we would expect the Clean Energy Standard order would impact them. As far as declining sales, obviously the growing use of behind the meter has already been a factor in that, and so load has been relatively flat as behind the meter has stepped up. Energy efficiency has also been attempting to do that. So we see load as being relatively flat, even going down slightly. In New York, with our revenue decoupling mechanisms, there really hasn't been a financial concern because we make the companies whole for that. We covered their distribution costs in that way. Here again, the amount of the cost for the RECs and the ZECs will be tied to the supply charge and collected from customers there. So I don't see any impact on the utilities from any declining sales perspective.
Let me just add, I think the revenue decoupling mechanisms we've used historically has made utilities indifferent, but actually what we're trying to do under REV is to make them economically animated by energy efficiency so that utilities are aligned with consumer interest in reducing demand when it's economically efficient, and it's to their shareholder interests as well as to the consumer interests. And I think the way the investment community has seen this is that rather, and this is really the heart of REV, rather than fearing distributed energy resources and energy efficiency as a compromise to the utility model, what we're doing under REV is to make it the benefit to the utility model, so that in the long run, utilities are actually looking for activities that help them to reduce demand. In terms of the grid supply, utilities are really indifferent. It's just a pass-through to them, although I think the order contemplates, or we will always contemplate, if there's advantages that we can look at to get better alignment, we'll want to be there. But in terms of the source of the electrons, utilities are generally neutral.
I would agree. And, of course, the REV orders have laid that out. There's the earning mechanism changes that are being discussed to try to encourage the utilities to achieve exactly that, lower usage by customers in cost-effective ways.
Right. Where I was going with this also, and I think it's a combination of you and Raj, so I'm just putting Raj on notice to listen.
He's his boss anyway, so yes.
Is that, we're looking at a number of different actions that we've taken since REV has started. Actually pre-REV and during REV, and not post-REV yet, but post some of the actions. So we're looking at already existing, for example, energy efficiency programs and other things that will likely continue, if not in the short term, needing to examine what that means for the long term with some of that, and whether we ramp up or ramp down. And then looking at the utility DSIPs, it's clear that it indicates investments that will be required to create the platform. Looking at REV demo projects, we see that embedded in that are a number of different potential investments that may come. And then looking at what we do, with a lot of the net metering issues, not just Value D, but others, that may or may not have an impact. So from my perspective, what I'm looking at is similar to comments that I made back in July of 2015, and as it relates also to comments that I made at our June 2016 session on the standard interconnection requirements, and folding that into the state resource planning study report. How do we envision that, and it's in this order, how do we envision the state resource planning process? I'm not asking for necessarily specifics on timing, though that's helpful to the extent you have it, but how do we envision that, taking a look at all of what we're doing here, even though that may be focused somewhat on the wholesale side as it interconnects on the other side? How do we dovetail all of that?
Raj, do you want to?
Yeah. Commissioner, on the state resource plan, what it is trying to do, it's a stakeholder process working with the ISO, the utilities, and staff and other parties. It's trying to assess how would the system look like in 15 years, 2030, with an expected change in the resource mix between now and then. So the way the analysis is being done is what happens in a so-called base case or reference case with very little changes between now and then, but not necessarily including CES in that. But now also consider a so-called change case, that is, if the CES is adopted, how would the resource mix look? And then assess with this change in resource mix, how does it affect any of the reliability parameters, and what are the tools to address the changes that may be needed to accommodate the renewables. So it's an analytical exercise that's being undertaken that would inform all of us significantly in the coming years as to what changes, if any, need to be made to the system to continue to make it, keep it reliable. So what we are adopting now would flow into that analysis more concretely now to help inform the planners and the operators and the decision makers to take the necessary steps in the coming years. So this would help in that process. I don't know if that answers your question.
If I can add to that, what I'm hoping is, the Commission actually started the state resource planning process almost 2 years ago now after the polar vortex, and we really started to think about what are going to be the investment needs moving forward. And I think since that time, a number of intervening events have occurred to help shape the nature of the inquiry. What I'm looking forward to is through that process, just like we've seen on the DSIPs, is we come up with a base understanding of the implications of the decisions, and then stakeholders will start looking at solutions so that we're not necessarily just looking at traditional solutions, but thinking about new technologies, smart transmission technology, storage, and also demand response, but that it becomes really part and parcel of what we're looking at REV, which is the creation of a two-way system that is fast-acting, fast-responding, more nimble, and all the various elements we would expect for a 21st century grid. So the State Resource Plan helps develop the base case, the process that I hope that staff will be engaged in with the ISO and others will make sure that the solutions are the best solutions for the state.
Exactly. You just outlined a series of tools that could be used, and that'll be the focus of Phase 2 of the study.
And I would note in this regard, the New York ISO, I've had the opportunity to speak to the CEO about this, and they are all in saying that moving forward, that they want a process that really takes a look at the best of the best and the most efficient solutions of the state, and we very much are looking forward to working with them in that regard. So, any questions? Okay, I'm going to then, with any further questions, I'll just start and talk about briefly, hopefully more briefly than I did before, about why I think this order is good and addresses our needs. With respect to the renewable energy credit program, renewable energy system, there's a number of different things that I think are very critical. One is I do believe that it's important that we look at this as a statewide program. Environmental impacts are not local. They're global, and certainly they're statewide. And in terms of looking at the payment for attributes and the value of a cleaner grid, it's important that all of New York participates and contributes their fair share. I am extremely appreciative of the fact that NYPA and LIPA have recognized this importance and have indicated to us that they certainly intend to comply, and I know we'll be working with staff to ensure that compliance is consistent with the outcomes we want to achieve. The second, and obviously one of the more complicated issues that we had dealt with in this state, is the choice of mechanisms for compliance. And it's really since 2015, we've been talking about the fact that when it comes to new renewable development, the issue of durability is very important. The idea of having long-term pricing is very important. And I really look forward, actually, to seeing the results from NYSERDA's last auction, where we expanded the terms of the payments to 20 years to see what that impact is going to be. But clearly, I don't think without question that for any developer, knowing what the payment scheme is going to be like for a long time as they look to finance, and knowing what that finance will, knowing that what those revenues will look like, will be very important. That being said, I know there was a lot of discussion in this record around the use of power purchase agreements and a lot of debate. Clearly, the Commission's primary interest is to see renewables get built in New York and that it be done in the lowest cost way possible. We're not, it certainly didn't fall on deaf ears for us that the value of having a power purchase agreement where the cost of the renewable attribute is bundled with the cost of energy and capacity could provide investors confidence because they can then secure their revenues. But as Paul mentioned, we do act within the terms of a federal cooperative nature. We do worry about litigation risk, and we also believe in the market and that people can make voluntary activities outside of requirements from this commission that can achieve good results. For that reason, I think that the order strikes the appropriate note. We're looking at durability of the REC payments. We are not going to be requiring power purchase agreements, bundled power purchase agreements at this time, and also we're not going to be looking at utility development and ownership of new generation. The same token, and I want it to be very clear, we are starting on this process. We want it to be successful. If, as we look at the implementation of the plan, we're not getting the results that we want and need for consumers, we obviously, as we always do, will look at what needs to be changed. But at this point, I'm very confident that with the durability of the REC payments, the scale we're talking about, and the other aspects of the order that I think are very important. One of the things we heard about was that one of the problems of the previous RPS program was the uncertainty of when auctions would be held and that they were canceled and the timing. So all of that is being addressed, and I think with the regularity, the certainty, the view we have, the volume we're looking at, we're going to yield very good results for the state, and certainly we'll use our review processes to make sure that occurs. The other aspect of the order I thought was important but worth noting is the Tier 2 decision. There are a number of smaller hydro facilities in particular who have talked about to us that they are suffering the same issues, that in terms of not being able to make a go of it because of the low cost of natural gas. Clearly, we don't want to see existing renewables have to shut down and then to replace them with new and more expensive resources. We want to maintain those units. I think the idea of the Tier 2 is to look at the maintenance programs we've always had in place for existing renewables and expanding that makes sense. I know that there is a concern that there are some projects that are under contract with NYSERDA right now that if once the contract is over may sell their power outside of the state, which again would mean they have to be replaced. I don't think that's an immediate issue. Certainly if it becomes a problem and we're not able to meet our mandate, that's something that the state can certainly look at, but is nothing we need to do right now. I also am, we are certainly cognizant of the cost issues that some of the consumers have talked about, and so in making these decisions, we want to be mindful of that. The other issue that I think it's important that this order talks about is the creation of demand. One of the things we've been working with in the last several years in New York is the recognition that consumers are really not monolithic, and that there are many consumers in this state, many businesses that have recognized an environmental sustainability and economic sustainability and economic wealth are one and the same thing, and that they want to actually do more than is required. We also recognize that introducing demand can actually create value because with the supply we're creating, we also have an obligation to look at demand. So one of the things that the order does contemplate, and as everyone involved in our proceedings knows, we are also looking at the changes and modifications in the retail market. One of the issues I think is very important is to think about how we will label how we will label green products in the state. If, in fact, our mix itself has a certain component of green, we wouldn't want consumers to be confused if they say, I want to buy a green product, and they think they're doing something when, in fact, the mix itself is just that green. So as part of the ESCO reset order where we're talking about development of products, I think it's important that we create a product that is very clearly what we call green energy, and that at a minimum this has to be an in excess, well in excess of what we would be doing year over year in the program. So, in my mind, what I would like to know as a consumer, that if I'm signing up with an ESCO and I'm buying what is a green product and they say that it's a green product, I want to know that those megawatts are really green. It's not just what I could buy from any entity, and it should be at least 50% or maybe 100%, and there are real green electrons behind that. The other thing that I think that the order contemplates doing in creating demand, and I'm particularly excited about, is the concept of a New York green product. I mean, here's an idea that I think we as consumers think about all the time. When we go and we buy anything in a store and it advertises a certain content, we'd like to know that content is there. I think a lot of New Yorkers would very much like to be able to say that the electricity they're buying is New York green and that it's truly coming from green revenues produced in New York. So one of the things that we're looking at in this order is creating that product, what that content looks like. So when a consumer is buying New York green, they know that somewhere in New York there's a wind turbine blowing, there's a solar plant, there's a biomass plant, and that it's truly part and parcel of the energy mix we're developing in this state. And lastly, the other aspect of this order that I think is innovative and will be important to many folks is the concept that we know in New York that there are customers who would prefer to buy simply 100% renewable products. Well, we want that to happen if those products are resulting in new renewable development in New York, because that's really where we want to go. And so we're going to look at, and have asked staff to look at, the development of a product that is 100% green, 100% produced in New York, and 100% committed to helping us meet our goal. And if it does that, then I think it's fair to say to those customers, if you truly don't want to buy nuclear, we will allow you not to be required to contribute to that program. But it has to be real, it has to be new, it has to be green, and it should be in New York. So we're asking staff to look at that, and we'll see how we can make that happen. The other question I think that is really important that this order talks about is the importance of energy efficiency. The staff and the Commission has, over the last several years, really looked into this issue. We are absolutely committed to maximizing energy efficiency. We believe that, of course, the reduction of consumption continues to be the most promising way to help us achieve our climate goals in a way that's also low cost. We have an ongoing proceeding under the Clean Energy Fund. We have assembled a group of what we call the Clean Energy Advisory Council. They're hard at work. It's a diverse group of people, and what we've asked them to do is say, what are the targets? What can we achieve? What are the best programs? And we're going to be pursuing those alongside of what we're doing in the Clean Energy Standard to ensure that what we're doing is maximizing value to consumers across the entirety of the value chain. The other aspects of the order I think are important is the recognition that New York is blessed, and I think that I'm saying that in all its meaning, to have really the potential of terrific offshore wind resources. We want to be able to maximize the value of those resources to the state. So one of the things we know is going on already is that NYSERDA is putting together a blueprint for offshore wind to see how we can best develop it in the state. And we're asking in this order that they add to that blueprint decision what are the best procurement mechanisms. We're not doing a carve-out for offshore wind in this order, but we are certainly cognizant of the fact that we don't want to underestimate the benefit of that resource and its potential for New York. The other things that we've talked about already are geothermal and also electric vehicles. One of the things that we're talking about, after all, is carbon reduction. But carbon reduction can also happen on the heating sector. It also can happen in the transportation sector. In other orders, the Commission has already looked for ways to maximize that, and we think that could be valued. While it's not necessarily part of the Clean Energy Standard, as we move forward, we need to think about that the ultimate goal is reducing carbon, and that these resources need to be blended into the total mix and the way we price energy at the retail level. And lastly is the issue of the review process. As Scott mentioned in response to, I believe, a question from Commissioner Berman, like everything we do and something that Commissioner Acampora always reminds us about is we should be humble enough to recognize that sitting here today, we're making the best decisions on the best information, but facts should dictate our actions. And so as things move forward, while we're not going to change the ultimate direction, we will adjust if the facts don't materialize as we expect them to be. And we will be doing these triennial reviews as a commission to make sure that we're on track to meet our goal. This review is not to change the target. The target is where we're going to go. It's going to make sure that we're achieving it in the best possible way for New Yorkers as we proceed and the technology changes. Our goal ultimately will be to get to the 50 by 30. As I said previously in my opening comments, is no longer a choice. I believe it's a moral and an economic imperative that we get there. In terms of the ZEC program, I think it's very clear in the order about the importance of maintaining fuel diversity and environmental attributes of nuclear resources. I entered into this industry in 1988, and from the get-go, the issue of resource planning and portfolio mixes and the really the harms that can occur if you don't have a diverse resource mix became apparent. And so we definitely want to make sure that as we're looking at moving towards a renewable future, we don't take actions that impair our carbon goals and that we recognize the attributes of nuclear. I think that the mechanism that the staff ultimately recommended to us, based on the many comments that we received and a lot of thought, really recognizes the fact that unlike the REC program, which will be based on auctions, in a nuclear program it has to be an administratively set price, and the best price is really the price we decided to do in the benefit cost analysis, where we looked at the societal cost of carbon and the avoided cost of carbon as the right value for that attribute. The program we're looking at really is consistent with that analysis. It represents really the fact that we will never be paying an attribute that is more than the value, the carbon value that it produces. And as Paul described in the order details, it makes appropriate adjustments as we go on to ensure that is always the case. The other aspects around this program is, again, the issue of durability. We know our nuclear plant owners make investments. These investments are long-lived, and in order for them to make it as confidence, they need to have the program last. But the other thing that we heard during the course of the public meetings, and I heard and in our comments, is we don't want to do this program only to have a nuclear plant owner decide to retire a plant, and then we don't get what we want in terms of carbon reduction. So the durability works both ways. The contract from NYSERDA provides the confidence to the units, but it also provides the confidence to consumers that the units will be there. And it allows us, as Raj explained, to make appropriate adjustments if that doesn't happen. So I think it meets all needs. Again, as I said before, I think this is a pragmatic approach. I know there was a suggestion that we look at RGGI prices. I think Raj expertly described why that doesn't make any sense from a need basis or an economic basis, and that what we're essentially doing is incorporating the wisdom of many, many economists that talk about the fact that failing to include the cost of carbon attributes in our retail pricing really can result in an inefficient market. So basically, in my mind, the decision is fairly clear. And if I could turn back really to the issues that we have before us, and the concept of not paying for the nuclear attributes and shutting them down now and looking at energy efficiency and renewables as a substitute is really not a practical solution. We could not possibly replace those carbon attributes, and as a result, in all likelihood, we would have an increased amount of fossil fuel in our mix, and our goals of carbon reduction would not be met because those fossil fuels, those attributes simply don't exist there. And so this is not an anti-gas movement. This is actually a pro-diversity and a recognizing the importance of fuel diversity and carbon reduction as an integral part of a utility system. One of the things that I wanted to note, and I was looking at these comments, and I will close here, Secretary Moon also observed last year that really this generation's the first generation that's going to have the opportunity to eliminate poverty, but it's also the last generation that may have a real opportunity to save the planet. As I said before, I don't see any other choice but to recognize that for the future, the environmental solution is the economic solution, and vice versa. I believe the actions that we're taking today we can all be proud of because we are becoming part of that solution. And again, I applaud the hard work of the staff, their thoughtfulness, frankly, their commitment, and I certainly intend to vote for this order. So thank you. Commissioner Sayre?
I will be voting in favor of this item. I'd like to start out by stating some things that I generally support that are advanced by the proposed order. I support Governor Cuomo's standards of 50% of energy generated by renewables by 2030 and a 40% reduction of statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. I support a broadly diverse mix of generation, including fossil, nuclear, solar, wind, hydro, biomass, and geothermal. I support economic development in New York State, including both the creation and the retention of good jobs in the energy industry. I support the creation of voluntary markets for renewable energy resources and energy efficiency. And I support a modernized, efficient, and resilient electricity network. This order advances all of these goals, and it does so in a way that ensures that the total benefits exceed the total costs. Going back to first principles here, a key decision point is whether we are going to recognize and quantify the social costs of carbon emissions as part of our public interest analysis in this decision. In my view, we would be failing in our obligation to make decisions in the public interest if we were to ignore these costs. It is true, as some commenters have pointed out in this case, that the costs of carbon reduction that are within our jurisdiction are costs to be paid by New Yorkers, but the benefits end up spread across the entire planet. If, however, everyone ignored the planetary benefits, because of local costs, we'd have a classic tragedy of the commons, a situation where a resource, in this case the atmosphere, that is nominally free is overused to the point that it is severely damaged and everyone suffers. Like the chair, I am proud to have a small part in a strategy that will have a positive worldwide impact and to keep New York in a leadership position of taking concrete steps to solve a worldwide problem. On the topic of zero-emission credits for nuclear power generation in New York, I am convinced that the benefits of the proposed program in terms of holding down carbon emissions, retaining good jobs and an important tax base, and maintaining a broad diversity of generation resources outweigh the costs that we're asking ratepayers to pay. I've lived about 15 miles from one of these upstate nuclear plants for the last 25 years, and I can say that Ginna has been a good employer, a good neighbor, and a good taxpayer. I don't see the ZEC program going on forever, but I am convinced that we need it now. I do not see any way that we could quickly replace the output of the upstate nuclear plants with renewable energy. Realistically, we would need to produce more natural gas and probably build more natural gas generating stations than we otherwise would need if the nuclear plants shut down in the near future. And I don't think that's the result we want. So overall, on balance, it's my view that the recommendation is in the public interest of all New Yorkers, and I support it.
Thank you, Greg. Diane? Pat, do you want to go? Sorry. Pat, you want to go?
Sure. Thank you. And I, too, would like to thank staff who has worked so hard and so long on this order. Also, thanks to the thousands of comments that were submitted in this case. And as by my questions before, we can see that some of the suggestions were greatly appreciated and have been implemented in this order. This was a monumental task, and as usual, the staff delivered an order to the commission that we have looked at and studied for a long time. And one of the most important things I've learned in my career is that when you have to make a decision, you have to always weigh, can part of this decision, does it benefit the good of most? And I believe that this order does. When I served in the legislature, I would use the example of when we voted on the budget. It's a huge document that is delivered, and it covers so many areas, as does this order. And are there parts of the state at times that do need more assistance than other parts of the state? But we are a state as a whole, and for New York to continue to be a leader, we have to think about that. And so, as the chair had said, I'm always confident that when we do something as huge as what we will do today, that we always build into it a process by which we can go back and fix something if it needs fixing. And I'm very pleased with the review part of this order, because that allows us to do just that. And so I think as we go forward, New Yorkers deserve to have a 21st century energy plan, and I thank the governor for laying out his state energy plan and giving us the charge to work upon that. And I want to also thank our chair, because she's really kept this process on course. So New Yorkers deserve affordable, safe and reliable, and really what we're talking about here today, clean energy and the ability to make choices. So I support this order, and I will be voting in the affirmative. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Berman?
We've seen an increased public focus on all that is happening on the energy regulatory front. In fact, some may say the public is more engaged than ever before on what is happening in the energy sector at both the federal, state, and local level. Spirited debate and discussion on energy topics have become the norm. We live in the greatest country that allows such free expressions and opinions. Clearly, there are many competing views and perspectives on this discussion item today. I am very mindful that not everyone will be happy with the decisions made here, and in fact, specifically with my rationale. I ask that folks understand we make these decisions weighing the entire record and within the framework of our appropriate regulatory and legal authority. I am also cognizant that energy regulation is a continual process, and to do it right, we must strive to continually work together. It is not just the regulator that has a stake in these discussions and their outcome, but rather all of us, including the parties in this proceeding, many of whom are here in person today, whether physically or on the web. We must ask ourselves, within our appropriate jurisdictional authority, are we doing what we need, and how are our needs identified and acted upon? In fact, the central issue for me when we embarked on the Reforming Energy Vision has always been, are we ensuring we are doing what we need to maintain and improve the reliability and the resiliency of our energy grid? These themes of reliability and resiliency are not new ones. In fact, at our July session, I spoke about being a young wheelchair-bound child in a New York City hospital in 1977 when the New York City 25-hour blackout occurred after lightning struck, ironically affecting Indian Point, among other plants. But that was not the only event that touched me personally. The August 2003 blackout, which in what was described as a blink of the eye, left nearly 8 states in the Northeast and Midwest without electricity. I was a young mother just starting back at work after the birth of my youngest and experienced the initial horror and fear of not knowing what had shut down our electrical grid, and then losing a freezer full of breast milk. But my loss of frozen milk was not the worst of it. Others were evacuated from office buildings, stuck in subway cars and tunnels. Elderly and sick New Yorkers at risk in sweltering heat rushed to hospitals, airport delays, and loss of essential telecommunication services. I hold close those events and others as a sharp reminder of the need for a reliable and resilient grid. All the bells and whistles don't matter if the lights go out and we struggle to get them back on. It is not lost on me that we are grappling these issues before us today during another hot summer. I have carefully examined the record and believe that the first threshold issue for me is if the anti-nuke sentiment expressed in the record is enough to stop any regulatory action. I very much understand the concerns and the passions of those who oppose nuclear purely on their personal desire not to have this in our fuel mix. However, after a careful review of the public comments, I see that the majority of those opposing nuclear remaining in our fuel mix are outside the communities of those upstate plants most at risk of retiring. And the majority of those public comments in support of the nuclear plants live or work or both in those communities. Thus, I do place more weight on those who support nuclear as remaining in our fuel mix. So that addresses for me the critical threshold issue. The next two become, is there a critical need? And if so, how do we act upon it? After further examining the record, I believe it is critical for us to decide today how we should respond to our nuclear fleet at jeopardy of retiring. With our low-carbon state focus, we have to find a way to appropriately save our nuclear fleet. There is a tremendous risk to the loss of this precious fuel source in simply remaining purely reactive and doing nothing. I cannot state strongly enough that with the implications of the nuclear shutdown timeline, there is a real imperative to get in front of this and address in the short term. The Gannett plant initially came to us as a reliability issue, and it remains so today. We are now faced with the immediate need to refuel Fitzpatrick, or it will likely shut down. These are not decisions we can put off solving, as once they are shuttered, we cannot take back our inaction. There are preliminary steps involved in acquiring fuel to keep nuclear plants operating, and the potential Fitzpatrick is contingent upon Tier 3 being in place before September. Bottom line, preventing the premature closure of carbon-free 24/7 nuclear facilities is, in my opinion, a wise energy policy. The key, however, is how to do this in a balanced way. I am disheartened that it has taken us to this critical point where we have no choice but to act quickly, even if it is not the most optimal approach. Thus, like some of the comments we received who support the nuclear Tier 3 approach, I am concerned about the costs. We need to be mindful that this short-term solution to retain nuclear generation is necessary, but through other stakeholder energy planning activities, we may need to examine other long-term solutions for our energy future. In the long term, I do agree with many commenters that the ultimate goal should be to examine potential market mechanisms to retain efficient nuclear generation and to incent renewable resource development so that our objectives can be harmonized with the wholesale market. As you know, the Clean Energy Standard sets forth the 50% renewable goal in New York by 2030. To meet this goal, it is important to focus on both the non-renewable 50% side as well as the 50% renewable side. To reach any of our energy goals, we need to have a modernized infrastructure in place to move electricity as well as other fuel sources. I support valuing the adopting a technology-neutral market-based strategy for reducing carbon emissions. Fuel sources are going to have to include nuclear, renewable, electric transmission, and yes, natural gas. There is no question, for me, fuel diversity is very important. This draft order recognizes that we desire to maintain and improve fuel diversity in the electric sector. An over-reliance on any one fuel source puts our system at risk. In fact, going back to the 1977 blackout, where Indian Point was affected and the electric grid went dark, it was gas generators that were used at the hospital I was at and many other critical facilities. In fact, there was a growing fear that if the lights continued to be dark for much longer, we might run out of gas for the necessary backup power. Moreover, when restoring power, there is a recognition that there can be for power plants, they need to be powered up gradually. The amount of electricity generated has to match the demand to keep the system in balance. Many plants of different types were shut down in the August 2003 power failure, including nuclear. Nuclear plants can take time to restart, so supply shortages may occur for hours and days after power restoration begins. Having a diverse fuel mix that can be called upon when needed includes more than just nuclear and renewables and provides us with very real reliability benefits. Interesting, in response to the 1977 blackout, the governor of New York State then requested the Public Service Commission, which was then and still is today legally responsible for the regulation of the rates and services of private electric utilities in the state. The Public Service Commission was called upon to investigate the causes of the power failure and make recommendations to prevent a reoccurrence. The study was to be conducted in 3 phases. First, the events leading up to the power failure, then the analysis of the 25-hour restoration process, and then a detailed review of the feasibility of specific recommendations made to the utility. The investigation was intended to aid the Public Service Commission in making decisions regarding system reliability and its relative merits and costs. The final report, released in 1977, began with an introduction which stated the following: the economic losses alone from the blackout are incalculable. There is no way of even estimating the magnitude of the personal and social costs suffered by the people and communities affected. Hence, the report concentrated upon reviewing the operations of the utility, then the New York Power Pool, and other member utilities during the power failures, including an identification of steps necessary to avoid future blackouts. There is a special, very important emphasis on improving system reliability planning procedures. I will come back to the system planning, but it again shows my central focus now on system reliability and resiliency was as important in 1977 as it is now. It is the bread and butter of what we do as regulators. We need fuel diversity and a robust energy delivery system. These are both necessary for a reliable and affordable energy system. But looking collectively at what we have done in past actions, the Commission does have a record of supporting investment in natural gas infrastructure. For example, in the NYSEG rate case, the Commission recently allowed NYSEG to invest in expanding its natural gas distribution system to address increasing customer demand and regional economic development strategies. We've also approved in recent years new natural gas power plants. It is important for stakeholders to recognize the Commission has an obligation to ensure reliability and to meet customer needs. We have an obligation, an ongoing and immediate one, to ensure that we are carefully looking beyond the 4 corners of this order, which today is focused on nuclear and renewable, and looking at all of our system planning and ensuring that the infrastructure needs of both our natural gas and electric transmission systems are being done appropriately. As more consumers are relying on natural gas for heating, we must watch how that impacts the availability of natural gas in the electricity sector. And we need to work towards ensuring we do all we can to ensure a vibrant, robust energy system. We should take heed from the critical situation before us today on the nuclear fleet and be mindful of the other fuel sources that we need to ensure are prepared to be there when we need it. Ensuring a diverse supply of electricity and a robust pipeline delivery system are complementary actions to fulfill our agency's primary mission related to reliability, affordability, and environmental protection. I am cognizant of the fact that the full item before us today is the subject of much debate and conflicting analysis with respect to costs to ratepayers as well as costs and benefits. I don't see the same critical imperative to address aspects outside the nuclear clean energy standard piece. However, I do understand that they are intersected. Just like nuclear and renewables, it also goes to electric and transmission. So when I look to it, I look at where are the pathways? What are we doing to be able to make sure that we clearly take into consideration all of the different planning tools that we're doing, not only at the Commission, but as the state as a whole? I have been laser focused on the state planning resource study, and I am glad to see that in the order it addresses that. I do think that there are some things in this order that may not sit well with all of us, but I think overall we need to be very careful, and we need to make sure that we look carefully, and while the order has implementation processes and looks to come back for some unintended consequences, we need to really be sure that we are including in an inclusive way the stakeholders that can help us make the right decisions and not do so blindly. It is important that we consider the cautionary comments of the New York Independent System Operator. The ISO pointed out that further analysis will be needed to determine transmission upgrades that may be necessary to accommodate the renewable resources that come online in response to the Clean Energy Standard. So again, it is critical that we continue to work collaboratively with the ISO and other stakeholders on our state resource plan and identify potential issues and continuously update our work as the Clean Energy Standard and other initiatives are implemented. I look forward to that. We need to be mindful of what we can do better, and we need to work now to help incorporate many of the things that we'll hear and look towards the state resource plan to help us there. The challenge and the goal of New York State energy policy is to balance reliability, environmental sustainability, and the cost of energy supply to meet the needs and demands of consumers and to support the growth of our state's economy. There are certain things in the order that talk about other open dockets, and to the extent that I have expressed opinions publicly on those and may not have voted the same way, I am going to, on balance, look at this and concur, because I concur for a rationale that is different from my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. I do want to note just one point. I do believe that the mechanism that we're paying for attributes, both in the REC program and in the ZEC program, is fully consistent with the wholesale market. It's something that the FERC has reviewed on numerous occasions, and there's no inconsistency. It's very complementary of these markets because it's paying for the environmental attribute, which FERC has recognized is outside of its jurisdiction and appropriately resides within the states who have the responsibility around energy adequacy and issues of fuel choice. So I don't believe you meant to say it was inconsistent. Obviously, as the order points out, the world is changing. If the Clean Power Plan comes around or other programs comes around that look at these very same issues, we will look at it because we're always looking for the best way. But the way we're doing now, I think, is fully consistent with the FERC markets. And then I can't resist, but as good as gas can respond, batteries respond even faster. So with that, I am going to move to a vote. So all those in favor of the recommendation to adopt the clean energy standard as described in the draft order, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? I concur based on my comments at session.
Recognizing your comments and that there are 3 in favor of the order, the recommendations are adopted. Thank you very much, everybody. We have another item. We have another item in front of us, so I think we can do this quickly. We're going to move to the consent agenda. Do any of the commissioners wish to recuse from voting on any of the items on the consent agenda?
On items 261 and 361, I will be abstaining as I have done in other orders similar to this.
Okay. So let me take a vote. All those in favor of the consent agenda with the notation that Commissioner Berman just made, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? There being no opposition, the recommendations are adopted. Well, thank you all, and I do think we had a chance to make history today, and I appreciate it. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.